Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev podcast. So, how do you strengthen the capacity of your workforce to meet the increasing demands you face today and in an uncertain future? And how do you create stronger, more effective middle managers capable of working together to deliver on your organization's goals? So, but what if there was a way of seeing your organization that identified ways to address these challenges? So, in this conversation, prepare to have your view of how organizations work to be provoked and challenged. We're going to introduce you to the world of tops, middles, and bottoms. And it's a really intriguing theory developed by Barry Oshry over 50 years ago, delivered across the world by Power and Systems. Now, full disclosure, this is something that Danny and I have actually been through, which is the organization workshop. And for me personally, it was a really transformational moment in terms of understanding organization. So when we made our dream list of guests we'd love to have on, what we really wanted to do was to invite Jeff along today, who is the president of Power and Systems, the executive director. So we're delighted to have Jeff join us today. Jeff is responsible for blowing our minds when it comes to seeing how organizations work. He's been executive director at Power and Systems since 2017, and he assumed leadership of Power and Systems after the retirement of Barry and his partner, Karen Oshry. And Jeff is going to give you a much better explanation, but Barry committed over 50 years of his life to unlocking the sort of the mysteries of power and powerlessness in organizations, and has developed sort of large scale simulations for organizations and teams to work through as well. So it's going to be a really fascinating conversation. And thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for that big introduction.
Brilliant. It's lovely to have you with us, Jeff. Thank you. So to get us started, just tell us a bit about your role. What does it involve? What do you do?
Sure. Well, as the executive director, I'm kind of responsible for the whole enchilada. And that's been actually the biggest growth opportunity for me personally, because I've always worked in my career 30 plus years in OD roles for large companies. Now it's kind of a big fish, small pond scenario where I have to do everything from sales to curriculum development to trainer relations to client engagements and everything in between. So my role is really, I kind of think of it in three main buckets. One is to really make sure that we're engaging with clients as a direct company or subcontracting to people in our network that are either better positioned geographically or expertise-wise to help that particular client. So that's one whole bucket of tasks and focus. Another one is really working on certifying people in our many workshops. There's the organization workshop that Garen referred to, but we have others as well, leading from the middle, when cultures meet, the Power Lab, etc. And really getting people who either bring this work to the organizations they work within, or if they're in a consulting role, to the organizations they serve. And so how do we deepen their knowledge and their ability to use this intellectual property? And then thirdly, we're constantly innovating and changing and transforming and adding to our intellectual property to make sure that we're ever evolving to meet the changing need of organizations around the world, and to make sure that we're staying relevant as organizations shift and change from decade to decade, year to year sometimes.
Plenty to keep you busy then.
It does. It does. It's been really gratifying.
So can you tell us a bit more? So for people who don't know the model and the workshops that you deliver, what do they involve, and how are they different to kind of other experiences people might have?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So Power and Systems, as the title implies, really focuses on power or powerlessness, as Karen said, in organizations. And what are the myriad of ways that we as individuals, teams, entire organizations fall into very predictable patterns in organizational life. And I guess the best way to describe it is we put a very systemic lens on the organization, specifically focusing on people. So you've heard of systems thinking before. Well, Barry's special genius is really understanding how do groups of people in organizations act? What predictable patterns do we fall into? What ways do we disempower ourselves or others, oftentimes quite unintentionally? And this work is really intended to help people have what he refers to as system sight, to no longer be blind to the patterns we fall into, but instead uncover remarkable opportunities and insights to increase our power, our influence, our impact on the organizations that we're part of. So it can be quite transformational, both individually, but also organizationally. A lot of leadership development, a lot of even OD work is often done at the individual level. You know, when you're working with a leader, it's about what are his or her individual competencies or success factors, or maybe you take it to the team level with a 360-degree feedback or something of that nature. But we're really operating at a systems level to really look at how does a leader work or navigate the very complex organizations that we all live in and on a daily basis.
Such a good explanation. And I think once you've been through one of the workshops, you can never unsee what you see in that workshop. You can never see things in quite the same way, can you?
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, one of the things that I love about Barry's work, and one of the reasons I was drawn to it a couple of decades before I entered this role, was that in addition to the just really remarkable and unique insights you get, the workshops are all highly experiential. So it's not just making sense to people up here cognitively, but you have a gut level experience that not only does it have a bigger impact, but it tends to stick with you longer because you really feel it down into your bones. And people that have gone through the experiential workshops, not only to your point, can they not unsee what they've now seen perhaps for the first time, but even years later, people will remark on, oh, I remember that workshop and I remember what happened in the workshop. And in fact, that even became part of the lexicon of our organization. We talked about, oh, that's like taking away people's shoes, and people have kind of benchmarks about their experience that they bring back to their real life, both personally and professionally. So it's pretty gratifying from that perspective.
Yeah, and it's the intensity of the experience as well. Sort of having done it a couple of times, it's as OD consultants, you go into it going, the second time you go, well, this time I'm absolutely not going to get swept
I
away
know what the
by the
secrets
power of the
are.
system. I've got this, the power of the system. I'm going to sort of have a sense of agency. But there's something in that experiential environment which is really created, isn't it? And all of a sudden you suddenly start to get the real forces that are at play in a system, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things that we do quite intentionally, but in a very safe way, is we create intentionally a pressure cooker experience for the participants. And increasingly, the world that we find ourselves in, whether it's personal or professional, is described as VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we intentionally create a VUCA experience for people. And in that experience, not only do they find themselves feeling things that surprise them, seeing things that surprise them, but even saying or doing things that surprise themselves. And most people do have that experience that the first time they go through it, like, oh, I get it now. But then if they go through the exercise a second or third or even a fourth time, and I've been through it dozens of times at this point myself, both as a participant and as a facilitator, it's amazing how powerful the system that we're in is. That even when you see that train coming at you down the tracks, it's still very difficult. Even when you see clearly the risks and the opportunities, it's very difficult not to get sucked into that dynamic. And these patterns, these predictable patterns that we talk about and people experience in our workshops, are so powerful and so ever present because it's such a part of the human condition. And so even when you see it coming, it's not always easy to undo it or to really expand on the possibilities that are available to you.
Absolutely. And for those of you watching on video today, you may notice that we're dressed slightly. We're in Canary Wharf, we're up on the 14th floor of the building somewhere. But we as consultants use this tool quite a lot. So we often see, and I guess we'd just invite you to sort of describe what tops, middles, and bottoms looks like. We found ourselves in a situation today where that was absolutely in motion, and then a new level of hierarchy came into the room, and then it kind of changed the shape of it again. So Jeff, could you just explain to people a little bit about sort of how the top,
Sure,
what the tops
sure.
is?
And I would expand that to go tops, middles, bottoms, and customers is typically the four worlds we explore. And there's even other worlds that we explore beyond that. But those are the four most commonly explored spaces, or what we refer to as conditions, that are in an organization. Now, oftentimes people think, oh, tops, middles, bottoms. That's just the old hierarchy. That's the old org structure of so many organizations that we kind of inherited from the military thousands of years ago. But we go much deeper than that in these experiential exercises, and people get a chance to experience and get insights about what is the top condition. Because it's not just the C-suite executives in an organization, It's anybody who is in the responsible position for having to figure things out and be responsible for the ultimate results. So even someone who's an individual contributor that doesn't have someone reporting to them, if they're leading a project or an initiative, they're in the top condition in that particular context. And these are conditions that we move in and out of with a great deal of frequency. So someone who is in the bottom context, well, in order for them to get their job done, in order for them to be successful and have impact in the organization, well, they depend on other people above them to give them the tools, the resources, the information, the permission to do what needs to be done. So all of us at times are in the bottom condition. I was just watching a documentary on my plane ride back from Dallas last night about Facebook, and it was about Mark Zuckerberg specifically. And they had a lot of footage of him when he was brought in front of the Senate and getting grilled by the Senate. Now, here's a guy that invented a multi-billion-dollar company. I think he was the youngest ever self-made billionaire at the time. And yet he was very much in the bottom condition when he was getting grilled by senators, even if some of them didn't know exactly what Facebook was or weren't able to ask very probing questions because of their lack of knowledge about what social media is all about. So the point is that all of us spend time in the top, bottom, middle, and customer spaces, and that each one of those spaces, or what we refer to as conditions, comes with some very powerful and very predictable conditions. So where we're in the top space, it's crystal clear to us that we need to figure everything out. We're responsible for solving the issues or exploiting the opportunities of the organization. When we're in the bottom, well, we're waiting for them to figure out what we need. And don't they see the problems or how we're not necessarily set up for success, and when are they going to fix it? When we're in the middle, well, we're stuck between executing the vision of the people who are above us and trying to support and give good direction and clarity of mission to the people that report to us from the front line. And when we're customers, either internal or external customers of an organization, well, we're relying on that organization to give us the products and services that we need at the speed, cost, and quality that we absolutely demand and have paid for. So each one of these worlds come with predictable conditions, and we as human beings have very predictable, automatic reflex responses to those challenges of those conditions that can send us really deep into powerlessness and disenfranchisement. So the workshops are a fascinating exploration of those patterns and those conditions, but also a really uplifting and ennobling exploration of what else is possible. How can you increase not only your own individual power and impact and influence, but actually really maximize the powerful potential of the entire organization that you're part of. So that's what gets me so jazzed about this work. And I so consistently see people getting really lit on fire about the insights that they gain and the relevance of those insights to themselves, both professionally and personally.
It illustrates to people when there isn't good health in the organization. So like the tops will often feel a sense of burden, the bottom will feel done to, and the middle is often a sign of is that they'll feel torn as well. And I guess this is about giving them more choice, isn't it? About the different options they can take to actually notice the signs and B to move the organization forward.
Yeah, in fact, I'd even back up a step and say that oftentimes when we're in the top or bottom or middle or customer condition, we don't even feel like we have a choice, that being in the top means to be burdened. We don't even see that our reactions to that complexity and that responsibility that we have when we're in the top condition, we actually do have a choice about how we handle that. We don't have to automatically end up burdened. And same thing with the middles. To be in the middle, by definition, means I'm going to be torn. You know, people from above me want things, people from below me want things, customers want things. I'm getting it from all directions. And so automatically we just say, oh, that's the nature of the job. And we don't necessarily see the more powerful options available to us. And that's what I think the workshop so brilliantly does for people.
Yeah, and we've read quite a few of the books. So seeing systems, leading systems, in the middle as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one of those things that sort of stood out for me in there is that when it's not working, when systems not working, it feels very personal to the individual, like there's something wrong with them. And so they therefore stop thinking about the system is the issue. Is that something that you see quite a lot?
Quite a lot, although I would characterize it slightly differently to say oftentimes people, when they're in the grip of organizational difficulties, they tend to take it quite personally, and they tend to see problems with others, actually. That if only this person would treat me differently, or if this person gave me
You've
more
just been in our
respect,
meeting, haven't you?
then things would be different. So, if I'm a person in an organization with a great idea about how things could be better, and I spend my time, nights and weekends, writing together a great proposal, very insightful and very provocative for the organization, and I send it up to my superior in the organization, if I don't take into account that they probably have 13 other complications already begging for their attention, I might take it personally if I don't hear back from them, like, what a brilliant idea that was, Jeff. And say, oh, well, that top wouldn't know a good idea if it hit him or her on upside the head. And I'll never spend my time doing that again. We tend to take it very personally when in fact that person is probably struggling to survive in that condition that they're in, whether it be top, bottom, middle, or customer. So yes, this work can really help people stop taking things personally and not get derailed or sidetracked by the stories that we as human beings tend to make up, and instead stay focused on the partnership and stay focused on how can we all collectively be in service of a better organization and better results.
So Barry and Karen developed this model quite a long time ago now. How have the workshops and model kind of changed or evolved since its inception?
Quite a bit. I mean, a lot has changed in organizational structures with holacracies and all sorts of different approaches to self-managed teams and things of that nature. And there were times even in my career where I wondered, is Barry's and Karen's brilliant work going to be less relevant? And somewhat ironically, somewhat counterintuitively, it's become more relevant over time rather than less. That even when you have an organization that doesn't have a traditional hierarchical structure, the conditions of top, middle, bottom still exist, if not even more strongly, because there's always someone that has to feel responsible for the results. There's always someone that has to deliver, roll up their sleeves and get the work done. There's always someone in the middle. There's always a customer. And so when you separate that from a more traditional hierarchical structure, those conditions still exist, but they're even more masked. They're even more invisible to people, and therefore can be even a more vexing problem for people to solve. So we've had to evolve the work that we do and change the language that we use, for example, to stay relevant. We've also had to change how we deliver programs. For example, it used to be pretty commonplace for people to go to our Power Labs, which were a week-long experience. And you had to be without your laptop and without your phone, which people can't do that for an hour nowadays, number one.
10 minutes.
But number two, during the pandemic, for example, we already had a virtual or what we call live online version of our workshops. And that became really important and, in unexpected ways, relevant, because all of a sudden, everybody was having to work virtually in most organizations that weren't directly serving the public, for example. And suddenly, how do we create an organization where we're building a shared understanding of our vision and how we're going to operate together when we're all working in different locations? And increasingly, that's the way the world of work is going anyhow, where people are working across different time zones, different geographies, and yet we still have to cooperate and have deep partnerships, highly effective partnerships, despite the fact that we're not often co-located anymore. Yeah, we've had to constantly look at the world we're in and the world that's emerging and make sure that this work serves those new realities equally as well as when this program was first formed.
Obviously, what was your journey into this? How did you personally discover sort of power in systems, and how did you come to be the person that now sort of holds the torch for Barry Oshry and Karen Oshry's
work?
Yeah,
there's three parts to the answer to this, so I'll try to make them all very concise. First of all, OD was not something I even knew was a career opportunity when I was in university. So when I came out of college, I was in the buying area for a large business, and it was consumer electronics. And So I didn't even know adult education was a possibility. And yet, as I got into that career very early on, I found myself becoming the go-to person for product knowledge about everything to do with consumer electronics. And so I kind of naturally, organically fell into training people, first on product knowledge, then on sales, then in management development, then leadership development, and then OD. That was my path into OD. Specifically on power and systems, I was working in my career and I always felt there was a piece missing. And I found it when I discovered the organization workshop. That was my first exposure to power and systems, was the organization workshop, or OW, as we often call it for short. And I went through it in an organization that I was working in. And then years later, when I was working at a company called Staples, they hired me to begin Staples University, to found Staples University for the organization. And I brought Power and Systems Organization Workshop into that to bring that systemic lens into the university setting. And it was tremendously well received in the organization. And we developed such a good partnership with Power and Systems as a user, as a partner, that we ended up being a beta test site for some of the other programs like When Cultures Meet, and did a lot of pro bono work for deserving organizations that couldn't afford the work and that sort of stuff.
How would that be, sort of introducing it into a large organization like Staples? Like, how did you start to see it start manifest itself in how people were sort of
Yeah, there were
behaving and doing things differently?
really three main ways. So initially we brought it in as one of our curriculum offerings, and we had different schools within the university: technical knowledge, management development, et cetera, et cetera. And we used it as kind of a public offering for anybody that wanted to go through the experience and to really think and act more systemically. And it got such great reviews that we started getting requests for it for intact teams, that we're trying to transform how we operate or how we drive initiatives through the entire organization. Because Staples was in 25 countries. It was a $25 billion company. It was a large, complex organization that was growing so rapidly that, managing that complexity was a pretty common challenge. And so intact teams really use this to say, how do we unlock the full positive potential of our organization as we try to do work in the larger organization around us? And then the third iteration of it, or third application of it, was when we started doing programs that were specifically designed for either new managers or high potential mid-level executives, and so more of a cohort, a slice of the organization, if you will. We ended up using it for those cohort-based programs, and it worked extraordinarily well to say, what are the unique challenges of a mid-level executive who's high potential? What are some of the traps that they find themselves in, and what is some of the untapped potential for power and influence and impact in your level of the organization? So in all three of those ways, it really served the organization well, so much so that every organization I worked in or consulted to, I brought this as a common offering to the table. And more often than not, it was extremely relevant to the organizations that I was serving. The final part of the story was back in 2016, my wife and I implemented what had been a 5-year dream, which was to quit our jobs for a year and travel around the world with our youngest child and our 2 older boys. Having older children, we realize how quickly that goes. And all of a sudden they're driving a car and you don't see them anymore. They're in college before you know it. And so instead of kindergarten, we put our daughter into what we called her a road scholar. And we traveled around the world for a year, literally had 3 summers in a row by following the sun around the world. And the reason I even bring this up is that when I got back from that, Barry and Karen, who I had known at that point for 20 years, said, we followed your trip with great interest. Would you be willing to talk with us about it? Because we're finally going to retire, and we don't have a plan. And we want to know how you pulled that off and what you really loved and how logistically you did this. And I kind of laughed because I said, I didn't think you're going to retire. The entire 20 years I had known them, they talked about retiring. And Barry at that point was in his 80s and still was working every day. So he had a lifelong passion for this work. Long story short, I went and talked to them and I asked them, what are you doing with Power and Systems? And they said, we have option A and option B. And I said, a simple question, which one do you love? And they looked at each other and said, they're both adequate solutions, but we don't love either one of them. And we explored that. And I ended up becoming option C. And so it wasn't something I had foreseen or expected. It was one of those career progressions that in hindsight made sense, but I never would have seen it coming necessarily. And so that's how I ended up here.
Brilliant. Such an interesting story. And, fate took you there, really, didn't it?
It really did. It made sense. I mean, even from my earliest, if I think about the essence of what brought me to OD or training in general, I really like it when the light bulb goes off for people. There's something that's really gratifying to me about that. And seeing someone get an insight or a new skill or a new ability that's really going to serve them well is what really, powers me. And Power and Systems, this work just is so closely aligned with what my personal mission is and what my personal gas tank gets filled up by, that it's really been a great marriage for me.
That's preempting my next question. I was going to ask you what you enjoy most about your role, so you've articulated that beautifully.
Yeah. Well, to some degree, I could also get more specific too, because I really love two things about my job. I'm at my happiest when I'm doing a certification for other people that want to get certified in this work, and they're really deeply invested in understanding systems and Barry's brilliance. So I really, really enjoy and learn quite a bit from when I'm doing a certification. So it never dries up for me either. And then the other scenario, because I was thinking about this in advance of this discussion, is when I have a client that doesn't just want an event or a program, but is really looking to make meaningful impact. Either it's some kind of transformation for the business or some kind of evolution of their culture or the way that they work with each other or the results that they focus on together. Those are the certifications, and that type of client are definitely my most favorite moments in the job.
And when you think about the wider field of kind of leadership and organization development, what's particularly interesting you at the moment? What are you looking into? What are you excited about reading about or learning about?
Well, what's been on my windshield a lot over the past year and a half or so since the pandemic finally subsided is that the tug of war going on about return to office. And what does that really mean for the people running the business? What does that really mean for the rank and file in the organization? And if we don't return to office with any regularity, how do we still have a very robust system where people are engaging not just on the things you might expect, like the preordained regular staff meetings, but what about the spontaneous hallway collisions that you have that result in a great insight or a perspective that really broadens your thinking about something you're working on? What about those invitations to the cafeteria where you really get to talk in depth with someone that's maybe outside of your day-to-day sphere? So I'm really intrigued by how is the world of work and organizations, even outside of work, whether it be a community group or a faith-based organization, how do things get done? How do you create a shared sense of purpose and mission? And how are you doing that in the ever-changing context in which we engage with each other? So that's probably the thing that is most present in the things that I'm getting curious about and really noticing.
Well, it's kind of refreshing to know, because in the UK, the hybrid discussion continues, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it feels like the balance of power is tipping towards trying to bring people back into the office again, isn't it? And not necessarily for positive reasons. Often it's for trust and control and those things as well. Like how you sort of see the picture over in the States there.
Yeah, well, yeah, I would say similar dynamics are at work. In general, I think the C-suite executives want people in the office more often, and they have very good, legitimate reasons for a lot of that. There is something undeniable about people being together in the same space. And again, in the more random but equally critical connections that we make with people to get our work done and have a shared sense of purpose. And it's undeniable that if I'm an employee, do you really want me to spend 5 or 10 hours a week in the automobile or on the train to get to work? That's that much more expense and time that could be invested better for the company as well as for my own personal life. And, companies had to rely on people to get their jobs done during the pandemic when they weren't there in person. How come suddenly that's not okay anymore? So there's a lot of good arguments on both sides of it, I would say. And I think there's a pendulum swing, much like in the real estate market. Sometimes it's a buyer's market, sometimes it's seller's market. There's a pendulum that swings back and forth in organizations between, oh, we need to be very responsive to customers and drive decision-making, so we've got to be decentralized. Oh, we've got to have more consistency and we've got to reduce costs. We've got to be centralized. The pendulums on a number of different dynamics swing back and forth, back and forth. What I am more interested in is saying, how can we balance both of those opposite yet very synergistic conditions that we have, whether it be the centralized, decentralized, whether it be the work from home and the independence of that, and the get together periodically to make sure that. So Barry has fascinating and really powerful language around individuating and integrating. And it's not like you should do one and not the other. How can you do both? And how can you have the wisdom of when to do each at the right time? That's really going to lead to a very successful, very fulfilling organization. It's not just about results. It's also about, engagement and making sure that people feel fulfilled and feel loyal to the organization and want to stay as well. So I'm really intrigued with, I don't necessarily think we're going to go back to the way it was pre-pandemic in terms of how often we work in the workplace. But we do need to find ways that work, whether we're working virtually or in person, that serve us and the organization and its customers well.
I can't leave that. Can you tell us more about individuating and integrating? So
yeah, sure.
What is it? And can you do too much of both? Like, is it attention to be managed? Like, how does that work?
It's attention to be managed. I think of it as a polarity. I don't know if you're familiar with any of Barry Johnson's work around polarity management, but it kind of fits very squarely into that category for me. So yeah, Barry, in talking about robust systems that are really robust and are actually more powerful than the sum of its parts, he has 4 strategies that we explore deeply in When Cultures Meet and some of the other work that we do. One of the pairings is individuating and the other is integrating. So think of a continuum, and you might be square in the middle, or you might be over individuated or over integrated. Individuating is when people or groups are really looking at the uniqueness, their individual contributions to the organization. It might be an accountant or a group of accountants or trainers or consultants or marketing people that are really using all of their talents and all of their wisdom and all of their experience and all of their technical expertise to the benefit of the organization. When we're integrating, however, that's when we're coming together. And it's not just because people have the same job role as us, but we're coming together as an organization. It might be as a department with lots of different roles in it. It might be as an entire company. It might be a subset of the organization. But integrating means we're coming together and we're helping each other have a fuller picture of the entire puzzle. We each have our piece of the puzzle, but when we're integrating, we're sharing information. We're diagnosing problems in the organization. We are creating best practices together as opposed to creating silos and reinventing, solutions all over the place. So integrating is an important way of being. Individuating is an important way of being. How do we make sure that we are individuating and integrating, not or? So it's an and, not an or. I forget who it was that was talking about the, I think it was F. Scott Fitzgerald that said the hallmark of a first-rate mind is to be able to hold 2 opposing ideas at the same time in your mind. And someone else talked about the tyranny of or and the genius of and. And that's kind of what polarity management for me is all about. And in addition to integrating and individuating, there's also the concepts, similar polarity, of differentiating and homogenizing. And so an organization can be too differentiated, and that leads to chaos, or too homogenized, and that can be too bland and too unable to really react to the different needs of the organization and the clients it serves. How can we differentiate and have different strategies for how we interact with the organization and its goals? But how can we homogenize and have a spine-tingling shared mission about how we do things and the commonality that we build on in the organization? So these strategies are really a very powerful way, a powerful lens for looking at how do we collectively and individually operate. And are we doing so blindly, reactively, or are we doing it very mindfully, very intentionally, with very specific results in mind?
I have so many questions. Okay, so I'm going to just pick two questions on that. So I guess so number one is that there's a certain amount of skill in integrating well. Just because people are coming together doesn't mean that they're going to do it effectively. And I guess another thing that we see is that the middles, when things aren't working well, will often be quite isolated from each other. So they don't do that integration that
Yes.
actually is
Yeah. The
required.
bane of the middle's existence is that they're so busy managing up or managing down, or in some rare cases, they're really good at managing up and managing down, that they have very little time, or quite frankly, very little interest in integrating with their peers across the organization. And yet, ironically, there's a lot of power in that for them. And actually, if they're going to end up in the C-suite someday, if they have aspirations for senior management, it's critical that they're able to look left and look right and understand the strategy of the other parts of the organization that they're adjacent to. Because if they are deeply expert in their area, whether that be marketing, engineering, HR, or whatever, they're going to be too one-dimensional in their thinking and their ability to really drive organizational performance and success. Middles, we often find we do a lot of integration work with, and there's two challenges that I guess I would highlight on that real briefly, if this is relevant. One is middles often are so busy managing up and managing down, they don't think they have time to integrate. Well, what am I going to do? Invite my peer that works over in that department to lunch and get to know them? I guess that's helpful, but that's a nice to do thing, not a need to do thing. They often fail to see that person in another function, another business unit, another part of the organization actually has an incredibly valuable perspective that would broaden their ability to be more strategic and more impactful in their role if they only knew how to tap into it. So it's not a matter of get to know you for the sake of getting to know you, but from your perspective, because you're in the same system I am, but you have a totally different perspective than I do, you're going to come at the things I'm trying to do, the problems I'm trying to solve from a completely different and valuable perspective. The other thing that's really vexing, I think, about the middle integration is that oftentimes middles see other middles at best as irrelevant to them, and at worst, actually, as competition for them. Oh, that person's going to be my competition for the next promotion or the next high-profile assignment or the next recognition in the company. So there's often a perceived self-preservation or reason to not integrate, as opposed to, I just don't have time for it. It's like, oh, even if I had time, I wouldn't. So we often have to first help people in the middle condition free up time, figure out how do I spend less time running back and forth between the top and the bottom, or the customer and the supplier in the organization. It's very busy, but it's not particularly effective to do that. How do I save time from that I can then invest in integrating and developing a more enterprise perspective on the organization and have more of an enterprise leadership impact? And then job number two is to get them to see the relevance of, if they free up time to do that, what's the benefit, what's the payoff, and how long does it take? And we literally will show them and have them experience, again, head and gut, that they will have tremendous, valuable insights to gain in 15 minutes or less if they integrate in a very intentional way with their peers across the organization.
And you've kind of touched on sort of the next question we wanted to ask, which is, in a safe enough way, you are transforming people's paradigms of the way in which they see the world. And it's not necessarily a linear process. What kind of challenges do you sort of see in the room when people are trying to work through these kind of, where their mental model of the old world doesn't match with the new world? What kind of challenges do you face? And
yeah, well, the good news is most people say, although this exercise is not real for me, it doesn't, mimic my everyday life. The patterns that I'm seeing and the feelings that I'm feeling and the insights that I'm getting are eerily familiar. When we talk about the challenges of top, bottom, middle, and customer, oftentimes clients will say, do you have video cameras in our hallways? Because this sounds exactly like that meeting I was just in, minutes ago or last week. And so the biggest challenge that I find, to relate to your question, is that oftentimes people will see the dynamics of the organization, but the hardest thing for them to shed is letting go of the stories we make up. And because the stories make sense to us, they fill in the mystery or they explain away the discomfort. And the stories feel very real to us. And in our stories, we're always the hero or maybe the victim or the martyr, but we're certainly not the bad actor. Someone else is the bad actor. And so the hardest thing we find is for people to let go of that. It's if only they would change, or if only the organization would get less crazy, things would be better. That no, I have to look at what am I doing knowingly or unknowingly that contributes to this thing that we all agree is not the most productive or the most fulfilling for us.
And that's so important, isn't it? It's that whole element of taking responsibility for your part. And some people can make a career of not taking responsibility almost. So it's not an easy invitation.
There's a lot of people out there that I am fond of calling on-the-job retirees, that they've given up hope that anything will ever be different, or that they can ever really do what they think the organization needs done. And that's really a sad waste of people potential.
So more broadly, how do you measure success then from the work that you do? What's a sign that you're making an impact?
Well, on a really visceral standpoint, when clients come back and ask for more, that's usually a good indicator that it wasn't just an entertaining workshop for them, but it had real value and real meaning for them. Going back to what I said before about my favorite clients are those ones that really aren't looking just for a program or an event, but they're looking to evolve their culture or evolve their leadership principles, or become more innovative. Another paradigm, another one that I bump into a lot in terms of a polarity is organizations that want to be more innovative, but they're also very stuck in the way we've always done things. And again, it doesn't serve the organization well to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, we're going to throw all of the things that led to our success out the window. But nor is it helpful to say this has always worked for us in the past, so therefore we're going to keep doing it into the future, whether it's relevant or not. So having that ability to, again, be innovative, but not let go of the things that are really, truly part of the fabric of what your values are and what makes you successful. So it's both preserve and protect what's valuable and relevant, but also be willing to adapt and learn and take on new ways of thinking, and even invite new perspectives, new experience, transferable skills, transferable industries into your system, and really consciously, mindfully, again, doing that. It makes for really fascinating work. And some of the clients that I love working with are just doing amazing things. And really, the speed of change has always been fast, but there's no more return to normal anymore. It's one change overlapping on top of another, on top of another. There's no recovery time. There's no back to normal. It's really kind of a state of constant change that we now need to be on top of and navigate.
You work regularly internationally. I think you're taking this call with us, even though you just flown back at 2 a.m. in the morning the previous night, and it's 10 o'clock in the morning where you are now. So firstly, thank you. How do different cultures consume organization workshops and the work, or are there sort of commonalities and similarities regardless of culture and those kind of things?
Yeah. Yes, it's another and, I would say that there's remarkable commonality about the human experience, that being a top has unique differences if you're in Southeast Asia compared to North America or Northern Europe, but there's a lot of commonality as well. And you also have to pay attention to, for example, if you're in, for example, a high context culture in South Korea or Thailand or China or Japan, where there's a lot more deference given to people based on their age or their organizational level or their education or their socioeconomic status, for example, you have to take that into account, and you have to be aware of that and treat those topics appropriately to not be out of step or out of tune with the culture. And on the other hand, I'm amazed that no matter what country I'm in, when we describe the challenges of top, that you wake up in the middle of the night and you're pretty sure you're the only one up worrying about that thing that you're that's making your hands sweat in the middle of the night. That's a pretty universal human thing. And the temptation to suck up responsibility to yourself because either you're the best one to do it in your view, or you'd feel guilty about delegating yet another thing to your team because they're already overloaded, and you end up inadvertently becoming a bottleneck in the organization because you can only focus on one thing at a time. So you can only focus on this or then this or then this. And so things have to slow down to go through you. And so inadvertently, when you're sucking things up in the top space, you're disempowering the organization around you. In fact, you're preventing people from having the opportunity to take risks, to learn, to grow, to contribute to the organization. And then when you do need that from them, well, you've kind of trained it out of them. So in often invisible ways, we disempower not only ourselves, but the entire system that we're part of. That is a very common human experience.
Yeah, so the road to hell is paved with good intention, often in organizations, isn't it? Lots of well-intentioned people
Yeah.
trying to do the
It's
right
often
thing.
not about, sometimes it's about ego or greed, but oftentimes it's not. It's good intentions that are very far apart from the impact that those good intentions have. You know, sometimes
You
our
were definitely
intentions
in
are
the mood
impacts
to
like
go
this.
in
Sometimes
today.
it's like this. Yeah.
Brilliant. That's really resonating for us, actually.
Yeah,
This has been good grounding for
Really
us
good.
too, hasn't it? And in this really fascinating career that you've had, working in multiple contexts, in multiple cultures, doing really significant and meaningful change with different organizations and individuals, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned along the way?
Well, in the context of the way you just asked that question, I would say listening and not assuming I know enough about the situation. That when you show up as a consultant, that's a fifth space, by the way, when you're the internal or external consultant, and you often have a predictable condition there that people are coming to you to hire you as the expert or the good servant to do what they ask you to do. Oh, we need team building. And I've learned to say, perhaps you need team building, but let's dig into this and let's stay in a co-creation partnership as we explore that and figure out if that's the right thing or not. Because I've also earlier in my career run into this situation where I either did what I was asked or I said, oh, I've seen this 100 times before. I know exactly what you need. And I show up as the expert. And I find myself then struggling to deal with the fact that midstream, other information became clear that said that original path we set down was not the right one. It's really important to stay curious, stay humble. Don't think you have the answers. Always dig, and then dig some more. So that in a general sense is my biggest lesson, I would say. I think the need to, I guess someone said this to me once when I worked for an insurance company, and I didn't think the person was a particularly good leader, if I'm being completely candid, but what they said was brilliant. And so it stuck with me. And they said, I've learned that context is worth 50 IQ points. And I couldn't agree with that statement more. That is a really profound statement if you examine it, because no matter how smart you are, no matter how much experience you have, without the context of what's really going on in that specific situation, you're missing a whole lot of value and a whole lot of insight. So I don't necessarily think of myself as a super smart person, but I do see myself as someone who's doggedly determined to get as much context as I can.
Love that. So good. So just a couple more final questions for you. So how do you invest in your own learning and development? How do you keep up to date? How do you keep yourself kind of inspired?
Well,
And
that's one of the
learning?
beautiful things about my role, is that it's kind of built in. Every time I do a certification, and this is not an exaggeration, I learn tremendously from our exploration together. That I have to open myself up to be not just the expert teaching them this work, but also what am I going to learn about it from their organizational context, from their organizational experience, from their ways of interpreting Barry's work. Every time I'm working with a client and get a chance to really work deeply within their culture. And I love it when a client says to me, you're like an extended member of our team. And I was just with my favorite client yesterday, and that's how I feel about them and they feel about me. And that's something that gives me an opportunity to learn all the time. And that really is one of the things that powers me to stay working as opposed to retiring, is that learning from different companies, different industries, different cultures, different geographies is a never-ending source of energy and motivation for me. And then on top of it, for example, next week I'm going to the ODN conference in Glasgow, Scotland, as I mentioned to you earlier in this conversation. And so I'll be surrounded by other like-minded professionals who are deeply interested in OD and all that it can do for organizations. And so that's like, swimming in warm bath water. It's just really a
It
great
is
place
back
to be.
amongst your people, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Brilliant. And that leads us on to the final question you really want to ask. So, what advice would you give someone who's actually considering a career in organization development, or is just at the early stages, they're just beginning that journey?
Yeah, yeah. Well, my bias is going to show through clearly on this, but really develop a systems thinking perspective, whether you want to call it a more holistic view of the organization, whether you want to think about it just big picture. But for me, OD is not in the details of a better performance appraisal. It's really thinking systemically. What are we really trying to drive here in the organization with performance appraisals? And how can we do that in a way that doesn't inadvertently actually hinder the very impact that we want to have, where people get all tied up in, did I get a 3.4 rating or a 3.42 rating? You can lose the whole thread if you're not careful. So really developing a more holistic or systems thinking approach. And I guess thinking about, don't just organize or streamline the work of the organization. How can you have not a 10% impact on the organization, but a 10x impact on your organization? How can you really help the organization transform or revolutionize or evolve what it does and how it does it?
Sorry, I'll have one follow-up question for that. Okay, sorry about this. Can systems thinking be learned, or are some people just innate systems thinkers? They can just see it, or can people actually learn how to be good systems thinkers?
That's a really good question that I think I need to think about a little bit, but I'll give you my off-the-cuff answer, and then I'm going to probably think about this after this call is over. It's a very provocative question. I think, like with many things, whether it be athletics or a particular field of study, some people are going to come to it easier. You could even look at whether it's DISC or Myers-Briggs or something like that, and say, for example, someone has a preference for intuition versus sensing in the Myers-Briggs world. It's my understanding from Myers-Briggs that intuition, people with that preference tend to see patterns and tend to think more systemically, naturally. But I've also, over the course of my career, met incredibly brilliant OD practitioners that have a clear preference for sensing as well. So I guess in my view, it can be learned. There might be some people that are more naturally predisposed to think and act that way than others. But I also would say that I'm really encouraged by two things that I've seen change over the last, I would say 10 to 15 years, which it used to be when I was talking to organizations about systemic thinking, it was usually the C-suite executives or maybe the head of training or leadership development or something like that I was having the conversation with. And the rest of the organization, it was kind of a either irrelevant concept or something of not great interest to them. Increasingly, I've seen more and more people at line leadership levels, not just in senior levels, really thinking and working systemically. And I think people are just getting more attuned to the fact that a lot of things are baked into the systems and our way of doing and thinking about things. And that to really affect complex systems, you need to think systemically. So I think it's becoming more prevalent and more broad-based, I guess I would say.
Really glad I asked that question. Yeah, thank you. Right. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for your time. It's been really, I can't speak for you, Danny, but this has been a really engaging conversation.
Really
enjoyed it. Thanks.
Really great. And it's given us loads of insights to take away. I guess some of the things I'm sort of taking away from the conversation is, if I'm stealing some of yours, just say, I guess that kind of that tension between individuality and integrating, and the often the middles, it's the power of them actually taking the time to integrate, that it's not, wasted time.
Well, seeing the relevance of even integrating and then finding the time to do it. Yeah, those are the two biggest challenges we run into in regard to that.
And I love the different sayings that you've got. I'm going to take away the tyranny of or and the genius of and. So
yeah, that was not mine. I did not invent that, but I think it's a brilliant insight. Yeah,
I'm quoting you on that now, Jeff. That's great. And just about that context is worth 50 IQ points. That's so valid as well. Danny, what are you taking away?
Yeah, I think for me it was the comment you made near the start of the conversation about the experiential value of the workshops, that kind of feeling things in your head, or understanding things in your head and feeling it in your gut as well, in terms of helping you kind of bring the ideas to life. I think the fact that the conditions, the top, middle, bottom, customer conditions, they're still there. They still exist even in a non-hierarchical organization. And the fact that it's just less visible when you haven't got a hierarchy.
Yeah, in some ways it's harder to even suss out and to figure out how to navigate it.
Yeah,
You know?
so that's stuck with me, and the importance of staying curious and just keep digging and asking questions to really understand what's going on.
Brilliant. And if anybody wants to reach out to you, there's a whole portfolio of work and books and a website and all range of things. Like, how can somebody take those initial steps to sort of reaching out to either you or Power and Systems and start to explore what's possible?
Well, the easiest way is to either call me directly, email me directly, or go to our website. Our website is powerandsystems.com. And my name is Jeff Boudro, Boudro, and you can reach me at jeff@powerandsystems.com. So yeah, I would welcome if anybody has just even curiosity about what we do or how this work might be relevant for them. Always happy to entertain a conversation.
Brilliant. We should stay neutral this, but generally organizations would work a lot better if people could actually understand this whole concept. It would make our life.
It would make our life.
This afternoon would have been much easier. As well. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. And for those of you joining us for the first time, we hope we earned your like on this. If you're watching this on YouTube, please feel free to subscribe. We're building an incredible library of brilliant thinkers and authors and practitioners like Jeff, who are generously giving their time to share their insights and their hard-won experiences as well. So please do keep following, and please do reach out to Jeff if you've got any questions about anything in relation to Power and Systems. And thank you for joining us. And thank you again, Jeff. We really appreciate your time. We've really enjoyed it.
It was a pleasure to spend some time with the two of you. Thanks so much for your interest and your great questions.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.